Hello, my name is Jesudamilare Adesegun-David, and I want to share with you about a concept called, monocropping or monoculture in agriculture, agricultural monoculture, and how that kind of like relates to, like kingdom redemptive investment. Did you know that in 2020, during the, pandemic era, uh, Nigeria's revenue, right? Basically 70% of it disappeared overnight. Why? Because of the oil price crash. I mean, there was no movement, so nobody was selling oil. And then 70% of Nigeria's revenue got wiped off in an instant, overnight. And why was that the case? Because Nigeria has basically, focused a lot on oil as its primary revenue generator. And that's a cautionary tale that when we actually focus on one thing at the expense of other things, a single point of failure can actually crash our entire system. And, I began to think about this in relation to the metaphor of, monocropping, monoculture, as we find in agriculture. Well, I studied agriculture in university, so that concept is actually very, very clear to me and vivid and apt. Um, I mean, like the concept of monoculture is basically like farming one crop across different, cycles, different farming cycles. So you're basically farming the same thing again and again. So it's soybean, and you're doing that year after year after year. Now, those who actually practice monoculture, they practice it basically because they're able to optimize for efficiency. It's the same thing. They become expert at it. So I mean, everything is familiar. However, one of the challenges is that when you farm a crop again and again on the same soil, what happens is that first, the pests in that soil and in that environment begin to build up. So they are peculiar pests for each type of crop. So these pests begin to build up because, like, they know that, okay, we were here last year, we found this. Oh, that means, we're going to be here again this year. And then another thing is they begin to build up resistance against the pesticides that are used, right? So if you use pesticides in this quantity this year, they develop some level of immunity to that dosage. And so next year you have to increase the quantity and then the concentration. And then if you do that for a while, like the pests begin to build up until that particular pesticide does not even have any effect on them. Number two is that when you farm the same crop on the land again and again, you deplete the soil of the nutrients that that particular crop needs. So what it means is that you begin to like invest a lot in inorganic fertilizer because again, organic fertilizers are quite expensive, so people go for inorganic fertilizers at scale. And what that does is that the inorganic fertilizers actually are made of chemicals that have residues left in the crops. And so when humans eat those crops, they actually ingest those chemicals as well. So you see the two dangers of that. But that is, like far removed and far away from what God established in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, we saw that God made a variety of plants, a variety of crops, which had seeds in themselves, and they could, multiply, replenish. Each of them was for a purpose. Some were trees that, tore very high. Some were trees that were, shorter in height. Some were just shrubs. Some were, edible crops, while some were just aesthetic crops. I mean, beauty was what they actually brought into the ecosystem. So when we think about monocropping and monoculture, it's actually like a different or far removed from God's idea of an ecosystem of plants and crops that actually complement each other and ensure the health of the ecosystem, right? And when we bring that to the idea of investing, we see the same thing playing out where we are actually like seeing more monocropping happen, where people want to invest more in things that can be optimized for efficiency, that can be optimized for profit. But God's goal for different trees, different crops is quite varied, in terms of like the impact they make. Some are proteins, some are more carbohydrates, some are more like, some are more related to vitamins. They supply vitamins, right? While some, are for aesthetics, while some are just to kind of like help to remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Different functions, different purposes, but all working together And that picture becomes a very great, framework for how we think about investing. When we think about investing as we beautifying God's world, as we introducing flourishing, as we introducing shalom, peace, wholeness, prosperity, tranquility into the world, they'll begin to have a different approach to how we think about our investment. So the question I'd like to ask is, in what way might you already have been, um, um, plowing resources into a single crop, kind of like framework at the expense of the ecosystem, at the expense of the land, at the expense of the environment? There's a story about a Brazilian couple. The man, Salgado, had actually like covered the Rwandan, genocide, as it were, and he was a journalist, a photographer, and he had shot some of these horrid scenes, and they got branded on his heart. They scarred it. So after the genocide was over and all of that, um, he found no meaning in his work anymore. One of the things that he and his wife, went ahead to do, to try to reclaim their souls again, was to take over an arid part of, an arid part of their country, and they began to cultivate it. They began to nurture it. They began to plant seeds of trees, of plants, of shrubs, and they kept doing this and doing this and doing this. And over the past about 30 years, they've been able to kind of like plant more than 2 million trees. Now that place is a flourishing forest, a flourishing ecosystem that has attracted all kinds of animals, all kinds of birds. Suddenly, um, suddenly endangered species are now finding opportunity to thrive within this new ecosystem that they've actually built and nurtured carefully over the years. Now, this paints a beautiful picture of what we can do with the resources God has given us to steward, the capital God has given us to allocate according to his will and to his glory, right? Where we begin to think, how might I allocate capital in a way that it leads to flourishing in an ecosystem-wide way, right? That leads to a holistic flourishing, like for an entire ecosystem. So we're not just thinking industries, we're thinking places. So we're not just thinking, okay, I'm interested in just, financial technology in Lagos or Nairobi or Johannesburg, but I'm interested in Johannesburg as a place. What kinds of investments can I make in this city that complements each other until something beautiful emerges? So this is the invitation that I'm bringing to you today, to begin to think, not just monocrops, but ecosystems of crops, of plants that have different functions, but with the mind of actually like building out something beautiful, something that glorifies God, and something that leads to flourishing for the people we serve. Thank you so much.